Hey, I got a question for you. Why did the pawn cross the chessboard? Just maybe it was part of a game of transference. Hey friend, welcome back to my game room. Now, transference games are the type of game that the main objective is to get from here to there, to get across the board to the other side. Now, sometimes that other side is the same configuration as what you started. It has to be reversed. Sometimes it doesn't matter. You just have to fill the same spaces. There are a few games that can be called transference games that are not necessarily swapping position with your opponent. But basically, I'm talking about games like Chinese checkers. We'll get into that later. And I also want to point out that I've covered some of these games already in previous videos, so I'll just make a quick reference to those, and you can check those out when you get a chance to learn a little more about them. Now, the oldest transference game that I know of is right here on the shelf behind me, and that is called Five-Field Kono. Five-Field Kono comes from Korea, where the Korean name is Opat Kono, part of a family of small strategy games that have been played by people from all walks of life for many generations. Unsure about the origins, but it was first introduced to the West by Stuart Cullen in a book on Korean games in 1895. Cullen translated Five-Field to distinguish the 5x5 grid from other games. It's fast, it's fun, it's a little different than its later relatives. To learn more, check the links in the show notes. I have done a video about Five-Field Kono before. Ugolki, excuse me. This is a Western Russian game for two players, said to be from the late 18th century. The winner is a player who got nearest to the objective when no further moves could be made. Then there's this, Ugolki, found on eBay, with more spaces and a different starting configuration. It's a European game commonly called corners, but played on an international drafts board of 10 by 10 spaces. It's on the internet, so it must be true. Then there's Halma. In 1883, the American surgeon at the Harvard Medical School named George Howard Monks came up with the game. Dr. Monks received a U.S. patent for the game Halma in 1888. It is Greek for the word jump. The British publisher Spear & Sons jumped on the craze in 1883, well before any rights were registered for the game. American company E.G. Horseman published the game in the U.S. in 1885. When Milton Bradley published it, fearing a rights struggle, they called their version of the game Ekha in their early editions. Monks finally sold his rights to Parker Brothers in the early 1930s. Halma was very popular for decades, spreading around the world, published versions by many game companies, and it was in print until the 1960s. This is my copy of a 1930s version of Halma published by Parker Brothers, and it's set up here for the 4-player version, and then you have extra pawns and pieces over here for the 2-player version. Next on the list is Chinese checkers. Now, I've pointed out many times it's not Chinese and it's not checkers. It's actually a German game, and the original name of it was Sternhalma, which means star Halma, and it's that 6-pointed star. So it makes a lot of sense. And it is essentially the same rules as Halma, just adapted to a 6-player version. What's nice about it, and the reason I think that it's caught on, is the fact that you can play with 2, you can play with 3, you can play with 6, you can play with 5, you can play 2 teams, you can play 3 teams. There's a lot of different variations that you can play. And let's face it, it's a lot of fun too. Over the years, Chinese checkers has been published under a lot of names by a lot of different companies, with even a lot of themes to it. You will find a lot of the stereotypical Asian themes with groups of Chinese huddled around that game board, but there are other versions that are not Asian themed, or at least not explicitly so. There's the old press board versions with the marbles, there's peg versions, the classic metal boards, and there's a lot of Chinese checkers layouts on the opposite side of other boards as well. So take your pick. Chinese checkers is probably the most popular of all the transference games there are. Salto was a game invented in Germany in 1899, designed by a music composer named Conrad Buchenbach. In Latin, the word salta means jump. It won a gold medal at the World Trade Fair in Paris in 1900. If you want to know more about Salto, which is a fascinating game, really fun to play too, look for my video here on the channel, and you can learn how to play Salto. Now, another one that I've done a video on before that's part of our Peg Pastimes catalog is Grasshopper. There's a copy of it back here in green there. Grasshopper is just a simple corners game. It's a quick little time filler. This is the one that you'll see on the restaurant table sometimes. There's versions of Grasshopper that eliminate some of the corner spaces. It makes it even more streamlined. I think those corner spaces do have some value if you really get serious about the game. But it's a fun one, and like I say, I've already done a video, so check that out. But then on a full-size chessboard, if you set up in the corners, then you're playing diamond checkers. Because, of course, if you take a square and you turn 45 degrees, you got a diamond shape. I think that's why they call it diamond checkers. But there's also a checker game that's played from corner to corner as well. So you get more use out of that checkerboard that you've had all these years. There's another game that I have already done a video about, and that's Troke. Troke is the classic transference game, but there's a whole lot more to it because of the stacking of the pieces, and you can check that one out in the video too. I think it's a great one, and very much related to that, also covered in the same video, is a game that I created myself called Star Castles. And Star Castles looks a lot like Troke, but it's quite different in the way it plays. I haven't got that one in publication yet. I'd say yet. We got to figure out how to mass produce those pieces without spending an arm and a leg. But it is in the list. It is on the horizon. So watch for Star Castles one of these days from NewVenture Games. And next we have Jumpin'. Jumpin' is a 3M game from the early 70s. It's essentially the same type of transference game, but the restrictions on movement are kind of the opposite of what they are with five-field Kono. In five-field Kono, every move is a diagonal. In Jumpin', they're all orthogonal. But it's essentially the same idea. You're trying to get to the other side of the board. Although it has a plastic board inside that bookshelf case, the pieces are real nice little machine metal pieces. There's another transference game that's very modern looking with flashy colors and nice plastic pieces and big geometric shapes, and that's called Traverse. There's a copy of it right back here on the shelf, or maybe it's Traverse, I'm not sure. I don't believe it's in print anymore. It went through several different revisions, but it'll do not 2 but 4 players, and that's kind of nice. But each of the pieces has a different movement power and direction and so on, and that makes it very interesting as you work your way across the board. Watch for the movements of your opponent's pieces as you do that so that you can take advantage of where they are. And the tactics that reveal themselves because you can see your opponent's pieces and you know what their moves are, and you can take advantage of that by blocking. And it's a pretty intriguing game. It looks a little frivolous, but it really can be played fairly seriously. And speaking of various powers, I think the ultimate in that particular category is Uncle Chestnut's Table Gype. Now, according to Chris and Paul Nowak, the inventors of Uncle Chestnut's Table Gype, they are not the inventors of Uncle Chestnut's Table Gype. It was actually invented by the author G.K. Chesterton and the other author H.G. Wells. In some of Chesterton's works, he refers to Table Gype and gives a lot of hints about how the game would be played, but there's no real rule set. And so the brothers Chris and Paul took it on themselves to put together the rule set and actually bring it to production. And so it was in very limited production. They were self-published. Each piece is actually a die, and each face of the die allows different movement capabilities. And every time you move a piece, you roll a die to see what its next available move might be. And again, as you work your way across the board, you got all these other potential powers that could come up and your opponent's powers to watch for as well. It's a great 2-player game. I actually have never played it with 4 players. I'll have to do that sometime. But thanks to Chris and Paul, that's a really nice little game. And I'm hoping very much that we can get it into production again because it is terrific. And so that's a brief presentation about the transference games. They're called other things by other people, but that's pretty clear statement, I think, of what the games are all about. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation and look forward to seeing you again. Meanwhile, if you play a transference game or if you play something else, be sure to play every day.